Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Josh Valentine. I'm the Communications Manager with the Clean Coalition. We are involved with we're developing the Sonoma Community Microgrid Initiative, and that is in response to the devastating fires they had last year in Sonoma County. And we have Greg Thompson, the Director for Community Microgrid Initiative at the Clean Coalition, presenting today. Before we begin, I'd just like to show you some technical aspects of the webinar that you need to know if you want to ask a question or engage with us after the webinar is completed. In your control panel for a GoToWebinar, if you have a question, Greg will try to answer some of those at the end of the webinar. So type in your question into the box and we'll collect those questions and he'll be able to address those at the end of the webinar. We will be sending a recording and the slides of the webinar within the next 48 hours. So if you have to leave early, you will be able to access that recording in the next day or two. And like I said, Greg Thompson, Director of Community Microgrid Initiative for the Clean Coalition. If you have questions you'd like to directly send to Greg, there is his email. And we're going to get right to it, and I'm going to switch it over to Greg for his presentation.
Okay, hello everyone, this is Greg Thompson. Welcome to our webinar today on the Sonoma Community Microgrid Initiative. And first I'm going to cover a couple of things about the Clean Coalition, and then we'll go into the presentation. So the Clean Coalition is a nonprofit founded and led by Craig Lewis, the Executive Director, and the team has been working hard through a few years now to accelerate our transition to renewable energy and a modern grid. And those two things go very well together. We're going to talk about a lot of that today. And we bring expertise across a variety of areas, technology aspects, policy to help drive policies to support and incent the right energy systems for our communities. And then project development expertise, where we help lead, pioneer, spearhead, whatever we need to do to put together projects that actually demonstrate why this is really the grid of the future. One second here. Josh, for some reason, let's see, I'm not able to move my slides forward.
Greg, if you just click, make sure you clicked on the window where your PowerPoint is. Click away from the GoToWebinar. You'll be able to advance.
There it is. Thank you. It was, yeah, thank you.
Sure.
All right, so our expertise areas, just some examples. We work on analysis and planning. So looking at the full cost and accounting for the full value of local power systems, known commonly as distributed energy resources, DER, doing siting analysis, and we've worked with multiple utilities and communities on these projects. We've done a lot of grid modeling and optimization to demonstrate through actual power flow modeling how you optimize distributed energy resources, local energy assets. And we've done that again with multiple utilities and communities. We work on program and policy design. This is very critical, of course, to change the market from one that supports such a centralized, archaic model of the past to one that is allowing distributed energy resources to flourish in the way that they should be. So we do grid planning, procurement, and interconnection work, and again, working with quite a bit of areas on lots of programs. And then Community microgrid projects, the one I'll be talking about today, for example, and others, where we do design and implementation in California now, not just in the San Francisco area. And we've also done this in other states such as New York. So I'm going to talk through this project, the Sonoma Community Microgrid Initiative, in 3 parts. I'm going to start with an overview of community microgrids, what they are and why they're the grid of the future. And then I'm going to show some examples, and then I'll get into the actual details of our Sonoma Community Microgrid Initiative. So first, an overview here, why community microgrids and what are they? So energy is critical infrastructure, and we're seeing this now more and more with fires and major storms that are happening across the country. What's happening is that our legacy centralized energy architecture, the one we've had for over 100 years now, actually carries multiple critical risks, even though it is critical infrastructure. The architecture is costly, it's aging, and it's inefficient, and a highly vulnerable security risk, as we've experienced. Extreme weather events are occurring more frequently, now demonstrating this vulnerability and the high cost of having to replace this centralized model for our infrastructure. Cyber attacks are a growing risk, and an attack on a centralized system affects millions, not just a few. So we have to have something that ensures both local and national security, and we have to move to a new solution. Now, community microgrids really create this new modern grid solution. They're cleaner, they're more reliable and resilient, and more affordable. So what is a community microgrid? So traditional microgrids focus on single customers, a single building or a single campus, if you will. Community microgrids serve thousands of customers. So we're talking about microgrid concepts and technologies, clean energy, energy storage, demand response, automating appliances, and the use of loads in communities, and applying that as a microgrid construct across those communities. We believe this is the grid of the future. So community microgrids are a modern approach for designing and operating the electric grid. They stack with local renewables and stage for resilience. So key features. You take a targeted grid area. It's coordinated, it's targeted to the local grid area, and it's served typically by a substation or can be more than one substation in the distribution grid. We look at how to optimize the penetration of clean local energy in that area and other DER, other distributed energy resources, such as energy storage and demand response and automation of how we use loads and how we generate energy for those loads in a local energy system like this. So it includes renewables-driven backup power, which is ongoing. It doesn't get disrupted. And that provides energy, electricity to our critical loads and our prioritized loads across that targeted grid area. And I'll talk more about this in a bit. And this is a solution that can be readily extended. This is a replicable model. This is an architecture that can go throughout a utility service territory and really anywhere in the world, essentially. So why? So this is a new way to do the grid, a new way for our communities to get served by electricity in lower cost and more resilient and more secure ways. So why? They bring these 4 benefits. Community microgrids have 4 really key benefits, and these are not provided by today's mostly centralized energy system. And the first one is really key. It's an economic value. It's lowering the cost of electricity that we all pay for. We all pay for the electricity we use, and we pay for the infrastructure that delivers that electricity. Community microgrids lower those costs while increasing economic investment in our communities. So what happens is we're reducing the cost of electricity by eliminating this expensive peak period and all the associated infrastructure that goes with it. So we pay for energy when it's most expensive because we're using it based on a centralized system that's sending it over long distances and has to send it to all sorts of places over those long distances. And that means we're paying for the expensive energy itself, but also all that infrastructure to deliver that energy during those peak periods. And then also with having local energy systems, we're increasing the economic investment in our communities, because the people who install and operate and manage this tend to be are going to be local resources. I'll talk more about that in a bit too. These local energy systems, these community microgrids, also improve the overall performance of our energy system. We're replacing fossil fuels. We're improving the grid performance by taking those peaks out of the system. And we're serving local transportation needs. So as our transportation grows in being provided or sourced through clean electricity, so electric vehicles, and we increase our transportation in electric vehicles through not only passenger cars, but delivery trucks and other things. The way to serve that electrified transportation the best is through local energy systems, through community microgrids. And that's better outcomes for everyone. Now, number 3 here, we also know that having local energy systems provides resilience and security, right? So you have ongoing power that you're providing to critical and priority loads in communities by having that power generated locally, stored locally, and then used when you need it. And this architecture, and I'll talk about it in a bit in more detail, can withstand multiple disasters and/or cybersecurity scenarios. And this model, as I mentioned, is replicable and scalable. It can cover an entire substation area. It can cover portions of a substation, and it can cover multiple substations, so it can grow and be scaled. Community microgrids feature local balancing. And what is local balancing? So this is a much more efficient way to operate the grid. It means that we're balancing load and generation in an optimal way in a local area, in a community microgrid. So we're flattening and lowering load shapes across entire community areas. And that, again, reduces those system-wide peaks. And so we're getting rid of that most costly energy and grid infrastructure. We're managing the variability and volatility of delivering electricity locally instead of having that exported across a bunch of places to one centralized problem, a big problem. We're actually handling those problems in smaller ways across multiple community microgrids across an area. And we're providing energy resilience and security to cities and communities, again, via this power generated, delivered, and consumed locally. So what happens here is that the distribution grid and the transmission grid become equal partners in how the grid is operated and how we get more efficiencies out of the grid. And if you think about, things like stop signs and stoplights and guardrails, we have these things in our transportation world because they make transportation better and safer and easier. What we're doing here in the grid now is adding community microgrids as sort of the stoplights and stop signs and guardrails of the future, and automation, of course, and sensors and everything else that goes with it. And our communities deserve this. This is really essentially the safer, more resilient, less costly way to run electricity in our communities, and it's just like having safe transportation. There are some key local benefits to local balancing. These are economic benefits, 6 of them that really are important. So again, cost reductions due to peak management. So with community microgrids that feature local balancing, you've got protection against the high cost of peak energy. There's also cost reductions due to demand charges. So these are the fees from utilities that are charged in addition to the energy you use. These are additional charges for using that energy during peak periods. So we're protecting against that with community microgrids. And then there are cost reductions due to rate management. So rates change. We have a big rate change coming here in California next year, which is going to show that the evening ramp, when we're using energy during this 4 to 9 or 5 to 10 p.m. period, ramping up the need for more electricity to be delivered, that's going to be a high cost. And those rate changes impact residences, buildings, all kinds of people using electricity. So if you have a community microgrid, you have a consistent cost for energy across a long period of time, because that's energy that's generated locally, used locally, and that's protection against future rate changes. And then cost reductions due to investment deferrals. So all of the investment in the centralized infrastructure we have, so all the transmission infrastructure that we pay for as part of our bills And in California, there's actually a charge added to our bill called a transmission access charge, which is added based on the energy we use, even if that energy is from a local source. So that needs to change because we don't want to pay for transmission infrastructure that's energy that's used that we're not using that transmission infrastructure. So we can defer these future investments by having a certain portion of energy generated and used locally. And then again, cost certainty. So keeping rates and costs constant for consumers as well as grid operators by having a local system, a community microgrid generating energy at the same cost over a 20-year period or so. And then finally, this does increase economic investment in communities, as mentioned earlier. And these current costs that I just listed are a product, are a result of our mostly centralized system today. And here's an example of local balancing optimization. So we have an opportunity in our communities with this vastly untapped commercial and industrial areas. You can see the picture there. These are energy assets. These are large roofs and large parking lots that we are not using yet because we don't have a model in place to get the most out of them. And that's what one thing a community microgrid does. And this is really a formula for low carbon cities. So getting, for example, 25% of the commercial and industrial rooftops in a medium-sized city such as San Leandro, where we did a program there, would equal about 25% of the local annual energy use, turning it into clean local energy. And this is the largest financial opportunity because you get the largest systems out in your community. It's the largest rooftops and parking lots. You're generating the most energy for everyone in that community. You are matching that with the largest daytime loads because typically the commercial and industrial area of a community uses the most loads during the day. These folks have the biggest utility bills, including those demand charges I mentioned, so they're very motivated to help. And it's the best solution for the grid too. Reducing that system peak is one of the aspects of putting this energy in these locations, and they're also served by strong feeders. And so typically you can get a lot of local energy on those feeders. And then these areas emit the most carbon emissions, have the most carbon emissions within cities. So you're also addressing the biggest carbon output of your area by focusing on this. So that's a local balancing optimization. So now I'm going to go through a couple examples quickly, and then we'll get on to the specifics of the Sonoma Community Microgrid Initiative. These examples really are leading to community microgrids being designed and deployed and compensated in other areas of the country as well as in California. And I'll start with California because here we're actually setting a precedent with community microgrids eliminating gas peaker plants. And this analysis was influenced by work by the Clean Coalition. And now the California regulators are rejecting new peaker plants such as Puente and Oxnard in favor of solar and storage, which is, of course, a key feature of community microgrids. And then in January, the California Public Utilities Commission also announced that PG&E will be required to use renewables and storage instead of gas-fired plants run by Calpine. And this is a quote here. It appears to be the first time a utility will procure energy storage to replace existing gas plants for local capacity needs. That's community microgrid local balancing right there. And leveraging this analysis really is going to prevent future new gas plants across the country, and that's already happening elsewhere. I'm going to go across the country here and talk about New York for a second. So New York uses peak power about 100 hours each year, and that costs ratepayers $1.7 billion to serve less than 1% of the needs, of the system's needs. Does that make sense? No, that doesn't make sense. Now that's just a fact because we have such a centralized architecture that needs to be supplemented with a lot more distributed energy resources with community microgrids. And so as a result of that, on January 2nd, Governor Cuomo in New York announced a state initiative to deploy 1,500 megawatts of energy storage. This includes utility procurements, changes in rates, and changes in the wholesale energy market, and using storage for large-scale renewable procurements. And one of the examples of this is the Marcus Garvey It's a housing complex in Brooklyn, so they're using solar and storage in a microgrid system there to cut costs, improve grid reliability, and provide resilient backup power. So there you have, one of the key states that went through, such a storm, Superstorm Sandy, coming out of that experience and saying, okay, we need a lot more distributed energy resources as a targeted system for our communities. And now they have also the New York Green Bank committing about 200 million, at least 200 million for storage related investments. Another example in New York is the Long Island Community Microgrid project, and that is a project the Clean Coalition led. It is a New York State funded grant. And we went through an analysis on Long Island of a community microgrid that would avoid about 29 to 38 million of new transmission capacity. And that's a net cost benefit for all ratepayers. It was a combination of solar and storage, and that system also would have reduced the New York ISO capacity charges. So those are basically, peak charges, if you will, by 6 million through 2022 and over $1 million annually thereafter. It would shift wholesale power purchases from peak to off-peak. So that's a net energy savings of about 2.5 million by 2022, and then more than 500,000 annually thereafter. And then resilience savings. So because the local energy system here, the community microgrid, provides resilience, when there are outages, you're saving obviously money from not having economic activity be interrupted. And so that would exceed about $330,000 per outage day, essentially. And that's savings for all the ratepayers in the area. And here's a quick design. And there's a lot on this slide, but essentially what you're seeing is a substation area. And this was the Long Island Community Microgrid design, the substation being the gray box on the left. We had designed energy storage and solar to be both near the substation and also at critical sites. And so this is a design that does a couple of things. It identifies the tier 1 or critical sites that that have loads that need to be served during outages. And then there are tier 2 loads, which are priority sites. And then there's tier 3. So when you have an outage, if it's at the transmission grid or in the distribution grid, each of these red rectangle areas are segments or sections of the distribution grid that can be autonomous, because they have generation and storage and a control system, monitoring and control system that will allow that to function even if the grid goes down. So now you have critical sites like pumping water, pump stations, like a fire station, police stations, hospitals, shelters. Those critical sites can be served with electricity even if the grid goes down, even if there's a big event because of this design. And that can occur, again, if the transmission grid goes down, you have the whole substation served by this community microgrid with storage and solar and automation. And then also those sub areas, those subsections can handle themselves, can be autonomous if any of the distribution grid goes down. So this design is replicable. You can apply it to anywhere. This is an example coming back to California in the Santa Barbara area. This is the Montecito Community Microgrid map view. And as we all know, there are big fires here and then mudslides. And so the Montecito area is doing a community microgrid project. The Clean Coalition is leading that. And this is the map view of that, showing basically the solar siting survey, the areas where we can get solar in that area. And then here's the similar design view, the block diagram showing the substation, and each of those rectangle areas are where you put energy and storage, energy generation and storage, to have a community microgrid that serves the whole substation area on a daily basis, helping to reduce peaks, save costs, provide clean energy. And then if the grid goes down, if there's an event, then each of those areas can be self-sustaining. So this is a project that we're in the middle of working on. There are many other states where this is taking off. So there are states taking big steps towards community microgrids, really recognizing the full value including cost savings, resilience, and sustainability of community microgrids. And these cover distributed solar, they cover storage, and now even microgrid clusters. And so on the bottom left in Illinois, they're supporting now microgrid clusters. In Minnesota, they have the biggest community solar program in the country, and they're adding storage. In Connecticut, they are compensating solar plus storage solutions for resilience. In Massachusetts, they are compensating the entire output of a solar system, regardless of how much load is used on the building. So you can have a warehouse with not much load, outputting a whole bunch of solar for the community. And then in Vermont, on the far right, they are compensating storage on properties, homes or businesses, to help reduce peaks in the system. Again, these are all features of community microgrids, and these are all steps towards us taking a much more broad approach and having community microgrids everywhere. In Puerto Rico, they went through Hurricanes Maria and Irma, which decimated, the island and the electrical system. That caused widespread wind and flooding damage to substations and everything else. It was the longest power outage in U.S. history. And now there's a Build Back Better plan for Puerto Rico. And that plan is a number of grid and energy experts across New York Power Authority, Con Ed, Edison International, the Electric Power Research Institute, utilities like PSE&G Long Island, the Department of Energy, et cetera. NREL, et cetera. So there's a bunch of people who got together and said, what is our goal and what is our recommendation? Their goal, stated goal, is to implement resilience and hardening measures designed to increase the capability of Puerto Rico's electric power grid to withstand future storms. And their recommendation is to use modern grid technologies and control systems and renewable energy resources and new technologies such as energy storage and microgrids to make energy abundant, affordable, resilient, and sustainable. I mean, isn't that what we all deserve? Our communities, as the funders and payers and customers of the electrical system, of the energy system that we all use, we deserve and we should be fighting for abundant, affordable, resilient, and sustainable energy, community microgrids. And this, again, lowers the dependence on large central generating stations. And this fact of Puerto Rico being hit by these, hurricanes, and then having these experts come together and recommend this, that doesn't mean it has to only happen in an area that's been hit by such a disaster. This can apply and should apply everywhere. So now I'm going to go into our community microgrid initiative in Sonoma, and it's really, rebuilding resiliently in Sonoma, who did suffer from these tragic fires, and we're all saddened by that, and we want to help Sonoma County rebuild in the best way. So our objective, to repeat what is happening in Puerto Rico, right, is to make energy abundant, affordable, resilient, and sustainable. And again, that's something that all communities should be driving for. And so our community microgrid initiative in Sonoma is helping to rebuild the fire-destroyed areas with high levels of resilience and sustainability. That's for homes, buildings, and the grid. So it's the whole community, enabling a modern, distributed, and carbon-free system, delivering all these benefits, substantial economic, environmental, and resilience benefits. As part of this, we're establishing a blueprint for rebuilding disaster-destroyed areas in a timely and cost-effective manner that also maximizes the economic and resilience value of energy as a critical resource to ratepayers, so all of us who pay for this, to property owners, and to municipalities. And to provide a model for operating a modern distribution grid that incorporates the optimal amount of distributed energy resources, local energy generation, energy storage, demand response, cost-effective local balancing, full interaction with the transmission system and local energy markets with the resulting benefits across both grid operations and the economic results. And then ensuring, of course, that building codes are advanced so that we have more resilient, safer, and cleaner building stock in our communities. Just an example here of the benefits over 20 years of getting, let's say, 30 megawatts of solar into Sonoma as part of the Community Microgrid Initiative. if you look at this, essentially local energy generation, local clean energy generation gives you a ton of economic benefits, energy benefits, and environmental benefits. The first one, their cost parity, actually, we're finding out that solar and storage is now becoming less than fossil fuels, and that's taking off. That's why it's one of the reasons why it's taking off. It also brings $150 million spent locally versus remotely, $50 million in avoided transmission costs, $20 million in avoided power interruptions. This brings $120 million in new regional economic impact. So looking at the middle section, the economic benefits, 60 million in added local wages, 1,000 job years, and 6 million in site leasing income. And then on the right, you see the environmental impacts. It's not just reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it's also saving water. There's a lot of water used in gas generation people aren't aware of. And so especially in California, where water is a very important resource we have to be careful with, we're also saving water and preserving land. So just 3 examples below there, commercial rooftop, a parking lot, and then obviously residential and multi-dwelling units, which is what MDU stands for, so apartment buildings. So we're combining the optimal opportunity of commercial and industrial with obviously what we can do with homes and apartments as well. So looking into Sonoma area, this is an example location, and we are working closely with both PG&E and Sonoma Clean Power and multiple leaders in the community, such as Rebuild North Bay, and I'll talk about the partners at the end here, to work through the full analysis of where is the right location or locations for us to do a community microgrid initiative project. And we've gone through and done a bunch of work already. I'm going to share some of that with you, but just note that the final decision here has not been made yet, and that we're going to be working through this to get to the final area. But this is one of the example locations. This is the Larkfield and the old Redwood Highway corridor, and it is ideal for a community microgrid. It's served by a single substation, Fulton. You can see the fire damaged area in the blue circle. These other lines are the feeders that feed the area, and there are multiple. These are example key sites, but these are multiple critical sites, priority sites. These are large roofs and parking lots. So these fit the community microgrid model. For example, the Sutter Santa Rosa Regional Hospital, where you would want, of course, that hospital to be running in the case of any emergency. The Luther Burbank Center for the Arts, where I think there is a farmer's market there in the parking lot, and you can have a solar canopy, shading people when they're going through the farmer's market on a daily, weekly basis. And then if there is some kind of emergency, certainly that can be a shelter. The Cardinal Newman High School, which got hit by the fires, and is a perfect, again, any school is a perfect opportunity for local energy generation, for storage, for providing, community microgrid features. And then, of course, if there's an emergency, it's a shelter. So other schools, so the Mark West School and the whole Mark West area, the Larkfield Shopping Center, etc. And there's it's a diagram here of this. So we have a block diagram of the Fulton substation area, showing, again, the red rectangles are the areas where we have generation and storage and automation, so that if the grid goes down, those areas can be self-sustaining, they can run. But on a daily basis, right, these areas are providing power across the whole substation, and are also reducing the peak power that everyone across that substation uses, so saving costs for everyone. And you can see that these are the tier 1 loads, essentially served during they're served during an emergency, and then there'll be tier 2 and 3 loads identified as well as part of this area. Quick, calculation of the Sutter Regional Hospital, the medical offices, the Luther Burbank Center, the shopping center, Cardinal and Newman High School, roughly 4 to 5 megawatts of solar PV available through those spots. And this just shows that whole area if you look in the sort of center and on the lower right, these are the locations we've identified initially. Again, we haven't completed this analysis. This is sort of an initial analysis showing where we would get energy assets out of this community for the community microgrid. Here's the hospital cluster as part of that. Let's see, you can see the total there in the middle, almost a megawatt there total available. Cardinal Newman High School cluster. Again, there's a total there of almost 800 kilowatts of solar available there. The Larkfield Shopping Center cluster, almost a megawatt available there, roofs, parking lots. And then the fire station you see down below, which would also get, of course, its own system as part of the community microgrid. And here's a ICA Feeder Map, ICA integration capacity analysis. This is the feeders showing their capacity for local generation and other DER. And I want to make one comment here, which is one of the optimizations we can do with community microgrids and local balancing is you can, let's say you take a community, a commercial and industrial area, and you're generating a lot of energy there, and that's used a lot during the weeks, during the middle of the week when those locations use a lot of energy during the daytime. And then on the weekends, they're not using as much energy in the commercial industrial area, but that energy generation can then be shared on other feeders connected at the substation. So you have people at home on the weekends using more energy that can be using the energy generated from the commercial and industrial areas nearby. And we're going to see a picture of that soon. And so there's a local balancing, natural local balancing impact here with a community microgrid where you're sharing the generation and also sharing storage. And it works across, not just neighborhoods of homes, but across bigger neighborhoods of homes and commercial and industrial areas. And that's sort of what we go through in the analysis is looking at feeders, looking at loads, looking at how to share all that across a community microgrid. So here's a second example location. Again, we haven't determined the final location or locations, but these two really are ideal. This is the second one. This is the Coffee Park and the Bicentennial Corridor. This again is served by a single substation, the Monroe substation. You can see the fire damaged area, the homes in the Coffee Park area, and right adjacent to it is a large commercial and industrial area. Again, you're looking at this as the whole microgrid being this whole area and optimizing generation and loads and automation. So the whole area benefits from the community microgrid. And here's some locations, again, example key sites, so critical sites, priority sites, large roofs and parking lots. There's a couple of Kaiser buildings, the Santa Rosa Medical Center and Foundation Hospital, the Hearing Center. There's a whole pocket of county offices, the Sheriff's Office, the Superior Court of California, State Office, the County Clerk Recorder. There's Sutter Urgent Care. There's a public storage you can use. There's the elementary school, etc. And then there's dozens of commercial and industrial roof and parking lot locations as part of this. This is the map view of the whole Monroe substation area. So the single substation serves all of this. The Coffee Park area is the upper left, which was hit by the fires. And what we are working on is how to design this whole system to impact everyone with generation, storage, et cetera, being distributed across this whole area. In the lower right is where those sort of county buildings are. And then there's the big commercial and industrial area right to the right of Coffee Park and other locations. So looking at, for example, the Kaiser Medical Center and Foundation Hospital with, about 1.7 megawatts of solar available there, roofs and parking lots. The Sonoma County Government Buildings Cluster, this whole area where you would want to have, obviously, energy provided during emergency events. The commercial and industrial cluster right to the right of Coffee Park. Lots of opportunities here. And then wanting to point out here, and I'm going to be wrapping up in a second, so we'll have time for questions, but there's a lot of support here. So we have ongoing support and commitment from PG&E, and they're in full support of this initiative, including the rebuild program for homes, which I'll be talking about in a second. I'm going to end up with that because that's really important exclamation point to all this. They're also committed to the community microgrid and grid modernization effort and in sync with the whole rebuild. They've made significant progress so far on their analysis of the grid opportunities for the rebuild areas. This analysis includes customer and feeder load profiles, the estimated duration of power required by type and critical type, so critical service type, the circuit configuration, the telemetry and the control requirements, the rough costs for deploying microgrids, community microgrids at various target locations. So that's the initial analysis. The criteria includes high-risk areas due to wind and fire, the grid topology, so that includes the capability to sectionalize or segment the grid to provide required isolation during emergencies. And this includes a community layout, to see the right spots for local generation, to provide that resilience for critical services, et cetera. So PG&E's analysis and our collaboration with them as an advisor on this is going to be completed in about 2 weeks. That analysis we will put in front of course, the community to get input, and that'll include people like Sonoma Clean Power and Rebuild North Bay. And then others, and we'll look at the best location opportunities for the community microgrid. Part of the recommendations will include developing microgrid-ready areas. So that's taking homes and buildings and making sure they're prepared for the community microgrid in terms of design, electronics, wiring, et cetera. So we can have these community resilient zones. It's important, again, to end up here on the homes themselves, because a lot of people lost their homes, and we all want to help ensure that homes get rebuilt without barriers. And so the homes and the buildings are really partners to the grid. The grid is our partners to the homes and buildings. And so we're looking at well-designed and well-situated homes with energy efficiency and zero net energy features, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Which is a valuable part of the resource mix when combined with larger solar and storage systems at commercial industrial areas. Residential PV arrays are part of a community microgrid. They can be sized for optimum contribution, fair compensation to owners, regardless of the demand, the energy use on the site. So you have total procurement of the whole solar system. And this rebuild for the homes, this initiative is being led by Sonoma Clean Power with full support from PG&E. This is the Sonoma Advanced Energy Rebuild for homes. And you can see that there's a link here on the Sonoma Clean Power website to find out more information. So Sonoma Clean Power, PG&E, and the Bay Area Quality Management District are leading this. The program is scheduled to launch in early May. So check back in April at that link on the slide. Essentially, they're really helping homeowners who are affected by the fires to rebuild energy efficient, sustainable homes. It'll be an enhancement to PG&E's long-standing California Advanced Homes program, offering 2 incentive packages tailored to Sonoma as well as Mendocino counties. Each package has a flexible performance pathway or a simple prescriptive menu. And if you have any questions, that's the email address to send emails to at Sonoma Clean Power. And one more second here. So this is actually on the Sonoma Clean Power website at that link. And you can see there are 2 options here, an advanced energy home and an all-electric home. You can look through the details. Essentially, the advanced energy home is 20% above code, 220-volt outlet at stove, range, water heater, and clothes dryer, an EV charging station provided free from Sonoma Clean Power, and the roof has additional structural capabilities to support solar panels. You can see the list of other things here: high performance walls, 2019 code windows, high efficiency water heater, heat pump, heating cooling ducts that are well sealed, water sense, efficient plumbing fixtures, efficient landscaping, Energy Star appliances, etc. So that's option 1. Option 2 is this all-electric home, which is also 20% above code. Again, the roof has additional structural capabilities for solar panels, the EV charging station from Sonoma Clean Power for free. The equipment is free. And then the features of the all-electric home include high-performance walls, high-performance attics, insulation inspection, cool roof, all sorts of great things here. High-efficiency heat pumps, smart thermostat, compact plumbing design, induction cooking, electric or heat pump clothes dryer, etc. And with either option, you can choose to add solar, and that's either a solar panel system on the roof, or you can pre-purchase 20-year premium, the premium only on 100% local renewable power, and that's e.g. Evergreen or Solar Choice from Sonoma Clean Power and PG&E. So as a homeowner needing to rebuild, the Sonoma Clean Power is doing everything they can to make this easy, and PG&E is supporting all that, as is the rest of the team on this project. And I'll end with this, and then we'll open up for questions. So here's the team. There are just a lot of really, really good people who are working really hard every day to make this come together. Folks at the Clean Coalition, obviously Sonoma Clean Power and PG&E, the Bay Area Quality Management District, Rebuild North Bay, County of Sonoma Energy and Sustainability Office, Stone Edge Farm Microgrid is now a partner on this. So Craig Wooster, who runs that, and the owners there are going to help Ann and Barry at the Center for Climate Protection, and Edminster at Design Avenues. This is just a bunch of people who really have been working hard and are putting things together to make this rebuild effort work for everyone, and then also bringing in the community microgrid features as part of that to help with, again, affordability, access to energy, resilience, sustainability, et cetera. And so that's the end of this presentation and the introduction to the Sonoma Community Microgrid Initiative. We'll be working on this ongoing, and we'll have updates. And again, I just want to reiterate that, all communities deserve abundant, affordable, and resilient and sustainable energy. And if anyone out there wants to pursue a community microgrid initiative for your city, town, county, just let us know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. Wonderful presentation, and we have got a lot of questions, but we only have time for a few. So let's get right to it. This one comes from Michael Sia from the University of California, Berkeley, and he is asking, would a community microgrid still use the Metrogrid as the backup energy source?
I would have to know exactly what the Metrogrid is referring to. And I'll answer that question the way I think it makes sense. So what a community microgrid does is it leverages the right amount of energy from the transmission grid, not all of it, obviously. We're looking at a mix of 20 to 30 or so % of energy used locally, generated locally, mixed with what comes off the transmission grid. So it's the optimal amount of both. And then that energy is used locally, stored locally when needed, used for peak periods like the evening ramp here in California. And it's not a fully islanded thing, except if the transmission grid goes down. And then you have energy generated locally that you can use locally for your critical services and your priority services.
Great, thank you. And there are a couple of questions that are related to how the microgrid operates and community microgrid operates and how it's structured. But the next question comes from Kimmy Wee. She asks, will microgrids be connected to a larger grid to feed energy back to the larger grid, or will they be completely separate?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is yes. It depends on how much energy you can, generate in a community area. And we talk about solar a lot during this presentation because we're in California and this is in Sonoma. But Sonoma has geothermal, and Sonoma can have wind. In the other areas in the country may have a lot of wind or other local generation. So the idea is that you can generate a lot locally, you can store a lot of that locally as you need to, and use it during the evening, night, etc., during peaks. But if there is excess, you can also export that, and that's actually one of the key aspects or features here is you're talking about a distribution grid that is interfacing with the transmission grid in a way that benefits both.
Right, great. And she follows up with another question. What in the and this could apply to all of our community microgrid initiatives, I believe. And Kimmy asked, what in the design of the Long Island Community Microgrid project makes it possible to serve microgrids even when power goes down? So I think you partially answered that before, but if you can.
Yeah, when the grid goes down, whether it's transmission or distribution, what powers services locally is the local solar and storage, and it could be other generation sources. In the Long Island case, it was a combination of solar and storage located at the critical sites, so fire, police, water pumping station, etc., and also larger solar and storage located near the substation. So if your transmission grid goes down, you have all of that to use locally. If something happens in the distribution grid, you have segments or sections of the distribution grid that can still operate.
Excellent, thank you. And David McCord, and thank you, Kimmy, for all your questions. David McCord from the Sierra Club, he asks, are there prospects for spreading community microgrids to build critical mass to reduce calls for regionalization from the California Independent System Operator, or as we know as Kaiser?
This is a great question. Thank you, David. Yeah, so there is a discussion of regionalization that would put the authority of energy use across essentially California in the hands of federal entities, FERC. Right now, that's not the case with CalISO, but the regionalization discussion would put us into the jurisdiction, under the jurisdiction of the federal agency. And so community microgrids are really the solution here, because we don't want to have that control taken away from us. It makes no sense. We need to leverage the energy assets in our communities for all of the reasons we talked about today: economic reasons, local balancing, resilience, security. And we should be changing the focus from spreading the control and jurisdiction upward again to a federal level. We should be changing the focus to focusing on local jurisdiction, local control and power. And in my opinion, we should create local balancing authorities who are the ones who have the authorization and the jurisdiction to do the optimal thing here in our communities with all the benefits. I would love to see an initiative where we have not just a regional balancing authority such as CalISO, but a local balancing authority. And that would be the load serving entity, whether that's the grid operator, the utility, of course, with participation and also programs from the CCAs here.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to keep shooting these off these questions to you, Greg, because there's a lot of good ones. Jeff Cook from National Renewable Energy Lab in Colorado, also known as NREL, he asks, and I believe maybe you touched on this a little bit before, but he asks, can you clarify how resiliency benefits were quantified in the case of Long Island? Did it use New York's cost-benefit analysis methodology? And if so, can that be applied elsewhere?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about how you value resiliency, and it's a tough question to answer. There's been, we used that report from NREL exactly. We used some other analysis as well. Sam White on the Clean Coalition team is really the expert on the economic analysis of community microgrids, including resilience. But there's a lot of people trying to put a value on that. So when the grid goes down and you don't have electricity for a community to operate, there's a lot of value in the system that allows it to operate. There's a lot of lost money in the lost economic activity of a community. And you can look at let's say a single manufacturer And you can certainly quantify the value of what happens when the grid goes down and that manufacturing site can't build the things that it sells. But that's only one piece of it. That's a simple piece of it. That's easy to quantify. The bigger piece is what happens when what happens if you don't have, fire control. I mean, we know what happens when you can't get electricity to pumping stations to put out the fires that have started. And that's what happened down in Santa Barbara. It's crazy. So it's a huge value to have resilience, and we need to think of it like stop signs and stop lights and guardrails for transportation and everything else, right? It's part of our safety and security and resilience for our communities. And by the way, it saves us money.
Yes, thank you. And let me move into utility. A couple of questions in utility territory now. One comes from Jan Greiser from PG&E. Jan asks, will you be looking for ways to reduce energy charges while the grid is up? For instance, shifting generation from off-peak to peak and load from peak to off-peak.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a key feature of community microgrids. We call that local balancing, where you are using the energy that's generated locally to reduce the use of energy during peak periods. So you're reducing the cost of that energy during the peak period, you're reducing the demand charges on top of that, and you're deferring additional investments in the transmission infrastructure to deliver those during those peak periods. And that includes not just the wires and poles, but also peaker plants. So again, solar and storage in the distribution grid in optimal locations can save across all those aspects of peak usage.
Great. And Seth Mullendor from the Clean Energy Group asks, assume you need utility cooperation for use of the distribution system. Has that been an issue? Who pays for the installation and maintenance of the disconnects?
Yeah, so we are cooperating and working closely with lots of utilities. In the case of the Sonoma Community Microgrid Initiative, as mentioned during the presentation, PG&E is contributing and committed to the solution, and it is a partnership. We have a distribution grid that exists. It's operated by utilities mostly successfully when there's not big fires and storms and everything. They run a reliable grid here in California. PG&E does a great job. Unfortunately, we have issues, of course, with the fires starting and high winds. But what we need to do now is look beyond that and say, how do we build the grid in the right way? Now, utilities are partners. They run the distribution grid. They are supportive of distributed energy resources and will be supportive of community microgrids as we move forward, just like PG&E is supportive of our Sonoma initiative. And it's a matter of looking at how the distribution grid operates today, and how do we advance it to support these community energy systems, which we all need. And we've done a power flow analysis of the distribution grid, and we know that we've all paid for it. It's there, it's operating, and we should leverage it as much as possible. And we can, and our analysis has proven that you can put a lot more solar and storage on the distribution grid and utilize that as a benefit as a community microgrid, and have that operate with the existing distribution grid.
Great, thank you, Greg. And one more question for you, and I think this is a good one to end on. This is from Pramrod Kulkarni, who is from Customized Energy Solutions. What is the biggest engineering and/or regulatory challenge in developing a community microgrid?
I'll tell you what I think it is. There's a few here, but the biggest one I think is having the utilities and the other load serving entities, the CCAs, be in the role of procuring local energy at wholesale rates. It's wholesale procurement. It's known as a feed-in tariff. The Clean Coalition does this. We call it a CLEAN program. But once you put that energy in play from a financial perspective, these energy assets, these big roofs and parking lots, these optimal locations, once you put them into play where there is an entity, a single entity, a CCA, and we have actually a grant project with the CEC, the California Energy Commission, to help create this model with the CCAs and to show that you can procure local energy at wholesale that benefits the load serving entity and the community. And then, of course, send that energy out to the community. And so that's a key piece. We have net metering, which works primarily on a sort of residential basis. We have utility scale energy that works obviously for utilities sending a lot of energy through the system, big wind, big solar. And what's missing is this piece in the middle, which is, wholesale procurement of distributed generation in optimal amounts for community microgrids. And I think if that piece is solved and we get load serving entities compensated in the right way to support that local procurement, we'll be a long way down the path.
Great, Greg, thank you for answering all of those questions and providing a great information on this initiative. Another well done presentation, and thank you everybody for sending in your questions. We got a lot of questions, and we're sorry if we didn't get to yours, but I will be sending the questions over to Greg, and he will get back to you individually as soon as he is able. So one last thing I would like to show you, as you can see on your screen, is our community microgrid, Sonoma Community Microgrid Initiative page on our website. And the way to get there is to go to clean-coalition.org, go to our work, community microgrids, and you'll see a number of pages on our community microgrid work. And you go to Sonoma Community Microgrid Initiative in that menu. We will be adding to this page as the months and years go on. We will also be uploading this webinar with the slides in the next 24 to 48 hours, and we'll be emailing everybody as well once those are up. So please keep a lookout for our next couple of webinars. Our next one's happening on March 28th, and we'll be sending out an email about that in the next couple of days. So thanks a lot, Greg, and thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.